the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Council member Mitch Englander and myself are present, so we have a quorum. And we will begin with general public comment. Bill Watkins. And this is to speak on any item that is not on the agenda on general public comments.
In the purview of the committee.
Yes.
Got it. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks. First meeting here. I appreciate speaking before you. Sorry for my hat head. I'm a volunteer pedestrian cleaner until someone pays me in the city of LA, districts 1 and 4.
Identify yourself, please.
Bill Watkins is my name. And with animal services, a general comment I'd like to make for a long time would be, I hope you ask for proper budget to staff animal services better. I'm assuming animal services is in your purview.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'm just pitching generally that you ask for that. Let's enforce all of our codes, dog licenses. The only way to do that is to staff better and to have more money for animal services. We need to ask the mayor and ask ourselves for a safety budget of more than 42%. It should be about 50% in my opinion, the other 50% for infrastructure. Let's ask for more to take care of our pets and take care of ourselves and our barking dogs. God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you. So general public comment is closed. And I should acknowledge Mr. Price, who is also here now at council. I'll ask that we put item number 6 on consent and begin with item 7, which is just a clarification, and otherwise I would make it a consent item. It's not clear from the wording of the report, but just to clarify that the mayor's recommendation is for an administrative deputy controller and not a controller aide, because both are referenced. Do we have anyone here that can confirm which of those it is? Okay, we will hold that on the table and see if we can get confirmation by the end of the meeting. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is a motion, Englander Corretz, relative to instructing the Personnel Department to report on which classifications of employees of the city who, as a result of their employment duties and responsibilities, come into regular contact with individuals who may be affected with hepatitis A.
Do we have a staff report on item number 3, or Mr. Englander, do you want to lead us through that?
No, I'm good with, I think I'm good for that as a consent item. Unless you want to go through it.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So, the outbreak was declared by the county roughly 5 months ago. Do we know if there were any immediate steps taken to protect city employees and what those might have been? Maybe from personnel here that can answer that question.
I'm Joanne O'Brien with Medical Services Personnel, and Dr. Manukian, he's our chief physician. When we were notified of the outbreak, we immediately worked with EMD and also the county on, first of all, the availability of the vaccination. And then we also worked with each department to identify those positions that were actually working with the homeless population and that were most at risk, the ones that were cleaning up the sites, the police officers that were sort of clearing the area. And Dr. Manukian can talk to this as well.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Identify yourself first.
I'm Arthur Manukian. I'm the Managing Physician, Medical Services Division. Good afternoon. The outbreak was declared September 9th. It's been 6 months. As of February 8th, there were only 37 documented cases of hepatitis A. No mortality, just morbidity. 75% uh, were hospitalized with good outcome. Uh, 20 out of those 37 cases were people with a was consisting of subgroup of so-called MSM, men having sex with men, and the remaining 17 people were either drug use slash homeless, living in the homeless encampments. So as you can see, there is no civilian contamination out of those two specific subgroups. Again, as of now, since September, there are 37 cases confirmed hepatitis A, and no mortalities. At that time, when outbreak was declared, we contacted Department of Public Health. We had a joint meeting here in this same room with a representative. We all are on the same page that to identify people that have, medically speaking, continuous, close, repetitive contact in a poor sanitary condition with potentially infected people. We identified that sanitation workers that are on daily basis are assigned to cleaning those homeless encampments are at higher risk than other citizens or other employees. We offered them a vaccination is still going on. Department of Public Health provided us certain dosages of those vaccines. To be honest with you, the compliance is not 100%. It's still an ongoing effort to vaccinate all those identified people, but we're still not 100% there, again, because of the poor compliance, and or people were notified that at their choice they can go to their own provider and get vaccinations at no charge to their own doctor or own provider. Maybe that contributed to lower compliance.
One of the other things we did as well is we went out to the homeless encampments and actually observed what the city employees do in terms of securing the area, cleaning the site, just to make sure that they were protected not only with the vaccination, that they had the proper protective gear in terms of gloves, goggles,
Right.
and the suits. So that was the other thing that we did. The other thing we did is also we partnered with the county, and those arrestees that are brought into the city jails, we provided vaccinations to those arrestees who more than likely were homeless. So to actually get to the source, so it was sort of twofold, the employees and also the arrestee population.
And also we were open with other departments, for example, Recreation and Parks. They identified few employees that are apparently assigned to the same cleaning services of the homeless population in the parks. So we offered vaccination for those folks as well, because again they appear to be at the higher risk of getting infected.
And does the city track workers' comp cases of hepatitis A?
We do, but I don't have those numbers, and I'm not aware of, I'm only aware of one case that was directly related to this outbreak.
Any other questions, Mr. Price?
Yes, questions. How many immunizations did we provide?
I know for LAPD right now, we have close to 1,700, and the county is helping us track those numbers, and for LAFD, they're getting those numbers. But for us, when we work with sanitation, street services, about 400. So we really did a pretty good campaign in terms, and we still have vaccinations available for those individuals that want it.
And how long will those vaccinations be available for those?
I'm sorry.
How long will it be available?
They're still available. We have to report to the county how many we administer to run out of that supply, then to ask for more. But since, again, as I mentioned, the compliance is not 100%, we still have the stock of vaccines, so we cannot ask for more right now, because we did not demonstrate the need. Right.
Any other comment?
Yeah, just real quick. So the 37, just for clarification, that you said were documented cases, those were countywide?
Yes.
Okay.
Los Angeles County.
And did we offer this to librarians as well?
No.
Was there a reason?
Again, medically speaking, they're not in a continuous, repetitive, close contacts with the source of the contamination, source of the infection.
I would suggest if we can expand that to them. They are. It's one of the hubs and gathering places in terms of city facilities, is the libraries. And we've been getting a lot of reports back from librarians about their safety because of it. We're dealing with that separately, but certainly their health. Not that I would suggest anyone's at risk, particularly at 37 with a population of 10 million and, 85 million visitors to this city. That it's a far better number than I would have imagined. So I don't know how you call 37 an outbreak, but certainly what we saw coming out of San Diego is what triggered this alert. But I would say it's probably, it could be, we'll only see the beginnings. We just don't know yet where this could go. It's not over.
I think the city responded so quickly as
Yeah.
well.
But I would suggest to the chair, if we could, that we'd ask.
Do you want to add that to your
we add
motion?
librarians as well to the outreach.
Okay.
Is that a suggestion? I'm sorry, I want to clarify.
It'll be a recommendation from the committee is what I would ask, that we
Go out
expand
and assess the
Okay.
worksite
expand
and
this to libraries and librarians, if that's okay.
So we'll pass this item without objection with the additional suggestion from the committee that we expand this program to librarians. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Item 4, I think we could approve on consent unless, Mr. Englander, you have anything you'd like to?
I did
Say
have
about
just a verbal amendment on item 4 just to simply add Northern California wildfires to it.
And that's actually interesting because we had had that discussion in our office as well. That,
Okay.
We probably missed some folks that were up there under the
Yeah.
same circumstances.
Sure, so if we could add that.
So we will pass item number 4 with the expansion to those who fought the fires in Northern California as well as Southern California. Item number 8.
Item number 8 is a Personnel Department report relative to the city's sexual harassment discrimination complaint procedure and policy.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. Wendy Macy with the Personnel Department. With me are Jody Yaxheimer and Olivia Flores, also with the Personnel Department. Here to provide you a brief update on what our team, as well as many other, the mayor's office, some council offices, and other departments have been working on with respect to sexual harassment. We're very appreciative of the council and the mayor's office bringing a lot of attention to this very important issue. And we've been working on a number of initiatives regarding our policies, our processes, our technology, and our training with respect to sexual harassment. So one of the things that we did, which is broken down in our report, is the mayor's office has established a new data collection protocol. Because one of the things that we do have, which is by design, is we have a number of avenues by which a victim can report an incident of sexual harassment. They don't all necessarily come to the personnel department, to Olivia's group. They can be resolved as is appropriate by their supervisor, by others within the department, or they can also go to state and federal agencies. What we hadn't had was a way to capture collectively all of those things. So the personnel department was really only seeing a small fraction of the incidents that might have been taking place to the city. So this kind of closes this possible data gap. And so since we've initiated this protocol on December 15th, you may have noticed that we've received 26 new incident reports coming citywide. And previously in the past 5 years, Olivia's group in our department had only received 35. So while that might seem alarming that suddenly we have a huge spike, we really actually think that it's more bringing transparency, that people are reporting things to us that hadn't been reported in the past. So again, we have a more accurate picture of what's going on in the city. Some of these instances that were reported were really things that took place in some instances years ago. So we don't see it as a spike. We see it as a very good thing. It allows us, again, to keep track of what's going on. These are under investigation. We can monitor that. And then we are able to provide accurate data to the council about how many instances we have. As I mentioned, we're looking at the policies, the procedures, the technology, and the training. The mayor's office has convened a working group under the risk reduction cabinet, which consists of a large number of departments. we have a meeting scheduled for this Friday with this working group, which is going to break up and actually look into those 4 categories and come back with some recommendations. One of the biggest ones that the council motion asked us to do was to have kind of a centralized online way of reporting these that is more easy for the complainant or the person making the incident report to report. Make it more streamlined, also make it more easy for us to collect the data and then track it appropriately. So that technology solution, we've been working with ITA. It's definitely something that they are fast tracking for us, so we hope to be able to report back to that soon. So at this point, we're happy to take any questions you may have. Oh, the other thing was an employee survey. The council motion asked us to survey all city employees and ask them if they had any thoughts or recommendations, how they found the current practices, if there were any suggestions they have to better the processes. So right now we're just working out, we've reached out to our labor partners and provided them an advanced copy of the survey because some of the MOUs require that we do so. And then once that is appropriately cleared, we're going to disseminate that to all city employees so that incorporate their feedback as well.
So the spike in reporting, I assume we don't think it's a spike in actual sexual harassment happening in the city of Los Angeles, but it's a change in our processes and a greater willingness for people to report, including incidents in the past.
That's right. Each department under the new procedure within 48 hours has to fill out an incident reporting form and then send it in to our group and personnel. So then again, it may be something that they have resolved already. It may be something that's under investigation. It's not so much that these things are happening more frequently, but again, the way that we're collecting the information has changed.
And do we think we're having any compliance problems with the 48-hour reporting requirement?
It's not like a strict rule, like if someone gets it in after 48 hours, there's no penalty or anything like that. We're just trying to encourage people to get it in as quickly as possible while the things are fresh in people's minds. And we're working with the various departments. We had some trainings with their personnel in all the various departments so that any questions they had with how best to fill out the form, and we had some internal discussions about, well, do we categorize it by the department that the victim is in? Is it where the other person was located? Is it the department that reported it? And so we've kind of worked out those things internally, and so we're kind of using the department the way the department that reported it, which it isn't always the same depending on how you look at it.
Right. I don't have any great concern if somebody reports in 60 hours. You're obviously getting at what we're trying to. I'm just wondering if we have any sense of whether people still find that awkward and they're not reporting it at all when they're required to.
We still have some follow-up with some individual departments that had some questions or concerns, and we're happy to meet with any department that has any such concerns to help make sure that the process works smoothly for them.
And will ITA and personnel provide us information on the online project and what the elements are of it and costs and all of that?
Yes, there's a group that's been working on this on the project, and we're trying to utilize existing systems that are within the city and see as much as we can kind of piggyback off of that, and rather than developing a completely new system. But we've given them the information that we normally would track in a form, and just making sure that all of that is captured in what they're doing. So on a going forward basis, it has all the key information.
Yeah, I'd ask if you could report back to not just ITA, but us at an appropriate time.
We'll be happy to.
Questions, comments, members? Mr. Price.
It's great that we are making these changes in the process and procedures. But what are we doing to actually publicize this to employees, letting them know that there have been some changes and that there are another way of proceeding?
Well, we're trying to make it more visible on our website. That's part of the feedback loop that we're getting with the various employees. If a lot of people say, "Hey, I didn't even know where I was supposed to go," then that's a training gap, and so that's something that we need to work with the various departments, making sure things are posted. Again, we're trying to make it more visible on our website. If we have this online portal, it'll be much more user-friendly for people to be able to fill things out. So we think all of these things, again, will provide more transparency to the process, as well as allow people a better understanding of what avenues are available to them.
I think Mr. Price makes a good point, and I think rather than just putting it on the website, which I think is more passive, once we have the program fully fleshed out, I think we really should do a blast to every city employee.
I think we do a blast. We put something in the payroll stub, some information about the new procedures. I think there are lots of ways we can really promote it and enhance it.
Thank you.
So I don't think we need a motion for that, but I think just to give you that feedback, I really would suggest that we do it in a much more proactive way and look at all the opportunities we have to actively communicate with all our employees and make sure they know.
Thank you for your suggestions.
Mr. Englander, anything?
Just one thing. So I assume that this won't be the first or last time that we'll hear back on this report, and it's probably going to be reported back on a regular basis, I'm guessing. So with that, though, are we also tracking the disposition of each one of these? So there's basically two columns. The department and the number of complaints. But there's no other information, and it's preliminary now, so maybe now it's new. Is a good time to set it up for additional columns on what we would expect in terms of clarity, because if we don't capture that data now, and then we realize a year from now, and we didn't track it, so this is great in terms of it's a good start, and having an easy system that's anonymous for people to report quickly is the most important thing, and the ability to get their issues resolved, their attention to their complaint is so important. It's also important for us to understand what the disposition of those were, what happened, and I'm not sure at what kind of detail we would have in such a report. Was somebody fired? Was somebody reprimanded? Did we find a complaint to, walk me through that? How far was it investigated? What was I think we start getting into the level of detail that's most important, besides just numbers on a page, because these aren't numbers on a page. These are potentially victims, right? And so I think we need to look at it very carefully from that perspective.
We are working, Jody Yoxheimer with the Personnel Department, we are working on a closure report so that we can capture outcomes and how the different incidents were concluded, basically. So that's one of the things that we're working on. We're looking at whether that would be a secondary report we would ask departments to submit when they had completed their investigation, or whether we can incorporate that information into the digital portal that we're working on. Ideally, the digital portal will allow information to go to departments for them to track their internal processes, or our process if it comes to the Office of Discrimination Complaint Resolution. And then we'll have, hopefully, the data that will show how each incident was handled.
And with that, I think it's important probably then to define carefully what those conclusions are and the definitions of those conclusions. In other words, if we come back, or somebody comes back and looks at it in the report in the future and it says, 9 cases were closed. Well, what does closed mean?
Right.
Really? So we want it to be self-explanatory, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we're also, and hopefully some of this will become clear once the survey is conducted of all city employees, but the degree to which people feel informed about the disposition of their claim or their incident as well, so that communication piece also. So we have a number of areas that we're exploring for the next piece of the process, and as Wendy indicated, making the process better
one of the things, in closing on this, in the recommendations for outreach, in terms of that blast email or I don't know who gets a paycheck anymore. I think that you get a stub, you get a pay stub. I haven't seen a pay stub in years. How many city employees are here? How many still get a pay stub? Online. But you have to log into some other portal. I don't even have that password. Anyway, that's a whole nother surprise. You got to walk me through this new technology. Pay stubs.
So you're not asking me to walk you through.
Well, no.
Thank you.
I know better. What I would ask is if there's a way we can work with ITA. I haven't seen this done yet in the city, but an email that has a required red receipt. We have it's there, and it's baked already into our system. We just don't use it. So they can probably maybe push something out, and this would be a phenomenal test case on it, because this is one of the most important reporting systems that we've established in the city. And so to make it a required, they click on red receipt that you read it. So anyway, just a suggestion. But I appreciate all the work you guys are doing on this. Thank you.
And the only thing I would add is I think we should also take a look at privacy issues as we do these reports and work with the city attorney's office and make sure we go as far as we can without crossing the line into somebody's privacy.
Correct. We're trying to be very mindful of those considerations. Thank you.
Very good. Well, if there are no other comments, I would ask that we note and file this report without objection, and thank you for all your good work on it. Item number 9.
Item 9 is a city administrative officer report relative to workers' compensation investigation statistics.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Leah True from the CAO's office, and with me probably from the City Attorney's office. On February 7th, your committee had requested us to provide some information regarding workers' comp claims and investigations. That has been completed. According to the City Attorney's office, 1,009 claims were referred to their office during this 4-year period, beginning January of 2014 through November 2017. Of each total number of claims, 542 had been referred through the city's third-party administrator.
532 had been
543.
43.
And how many of these suspected fraudulent claims were referred to LAPD for further investigation?
Councilman, perhaps I could answer that question. Since we provided these statistics to the CAO's office originally, we've had an opportunity to revise them a little bit. We've gone a little bit deeper, and we met with the LAPD. I was able to get their statistics yesterday morning because we realized that sometimes we have crossovers. We may start an investigation of an LAPD civilian or sworn employee and subsequently refer it to them. We let them know when we're investigating one of their employees, and they may opt to take over that investigation, various criteria. It's better for them to do it than for us. So we've revised these numbers. I can share them with you if you care right
Please.
now. We have a total of 1,275 total investigations that were conducted for possible fraud or abuse, and those came to us in the following manner. 289 of those were referred to our office by TriStar, the third-party administrator of the police sworn cases. 36 of them came from Ames, who handles the civilian, fire civilian and fire sworn. 101 of those referrals came from Acme, or now Elite, the third-party administrator who handles some of the ADR claims, police, civilian, and all of our conflict cases. Those are cases that involve a city attorney employee that we really don't feel comfortable handling as a conflict. The Office of the City Attorney originated 241 of those calls or those referrals. That's the total of the 1,275. From those, we were able to determine that 16 cases were referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecutions. 10 of them were accepted and criminal charges were filed. 6 cases are pending presently with the district attorney. They've had 4 criminal trials with 2 convictions and 2 not guilty. Those were the LAPD statistics: 16 to the DA, 10 filed, 4 trials, 2 convictions, and 2 not guilties. From our office, the Office of the City Attorney, we had 7 cases referred for criminal filings. 2 were filed. We've had 1 trial, 1 case is pending. The 1 trial resulted in a hung jury, and the district attorney has elected to retry that individual. That trial will take place in March.
The 1275, if I could, Mr. Chair, just so I understand there. 1275, that was over the last 4 years, though, correct?
Yes, that's for the last 4 years.
Thank you.
And any of the suspected fraudulent claims for participants in the DROP program?
I'm certain there are some. We don't have all of the information on who the members that are in DROP. We're in the process of securing that information through the personnel department. We may be able to come up with that. I know there are members of DROP that have been investigated, but I don't offhand know the numbers. I think they're fairly small, frankly.
Yeah, it would be instructive, since there's been a lot of spotlight on potential fraudulent claims in the DROP program to get that cross-referenced.
We'll be glad to provide that to you at a later date.
And since the CAO report was released, has there been an update on the 4 remaining claims that were referred to the DA?
As far as I know, that's the current status as of yesterday.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Mr. Englander?
Just so I understand, the 1275, those were referrals from various sources to look into. And of that, though, what was the pool? How many over 4 years were on workers' comp over that entire 4-year period?
I'm not sure I could tell you that off the top of my head, how many of those people were on.
I guess my question is, those were 1,275 over the last 4 years that were referred to from different sources for investigation.
Correct.
For possible fraud.
Fraud or abuse.
Or abuse. Those are 1,275 over 4 years. Out of how many people were on workers' comp, on and off, over 4 years? So that's a pool of, how large was that pool?
I would have to defer to the personnel department for the totality. I could tell you that the average number of, because these cases are generally investigated when the claim is first filed. It's not too common that we get them years afterwards. We know that TriStar gets about 3,000 new claims per year.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the police sworn. And Ames gets about 1,200 new claims. Elite gets about 425. This is an average over the 4-year period. And the remainder of the city has about 2,100.
These are their averages. They're not actuals.
Correct. They're averages.
Jody Oxheimer with the Personnel Department. That the city receives about, and again, averages, so apologies for that, 7,000 new claims a year.
Okay. So out of roughly approximately 30,000 claims over 4 years, sort of what we're looking at, 30,000 claims resulted in 1,200 being flagged, 1,200 to 1,300 being flagged for possible fraud or abuse. And of those, there was 1 prosecuted.
No, there were 16 filed, or 10 filed.
Right.
And 2 from our, that's 12 that were filed.
16
criminal.
that were sent to the DA, 10 that were accepted, 6 that are pending, 2 convictions.
Correct.
So 2 out of 30,000 were convicted for fraud or abuse.
That is correct.
So I think this sort of requires maybe a deeper dive into understanding and a full explanation of what is fraud, what is abuse, what is a flag, to flag the file. How many times can an individual be flagged? and certainly more a comprehensive forensic analysis of what we're really looking at. Because I'll tell you right now, just my gut instinct is that the numbers are far higher in fraud and abuse in this space over the last 4 years of 30,000 individuals who have filed for workers' comp than 2 convictions. Just guessing that it's probably a little higher than that.
I would note that fraud is a very unusual crime. It's a crime of stealth. It's very difficult to identify it in the first place, quite frankly, and it's very difficult to successfully prosecute. We deal with so many issues in the medicals and everything else.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, but it's not impossible, and I don't think we're doing a great job. I'll tell you, when you're reading stories, for example, of individuals who are on workers' comp and then, running marathons and winning, and those aren't unique, by the way. I will say that I don't have to be too politically sensitive on this. There's no doubt in my mind that there are many, in fact most, and probably the supermajority of folks who have medical issues after many years, particularly our first responders, who endure a lot. There's no doubt. But I'm not talking about them. I'm not talking about the supermajority. But I'm also not talking about 2 people that have been convicted out of the 30,000 who have filed over the last 4 years. There's a huge discrepancy. There's just no doubt in my mind. And so I guess the question becomes, and it's really for this committee, is and looking at where we're going with the new RFP, it's critical that we bake in our expectations and clarity to correct some of these discrepancies so we can understand what our providers are to look out for and report back on and get our arms around, and not just as it relates to drop, but its entire space. Workers' comp is costing the city tens of millions of dollars in not only out-of-pocket costs, but service and it's costing the taxpayers and productivity. And so with that, I think it's incumbent upon us to look at what kind of report back we'd really like to see. And now I know this was thrown together quickly at the last minute, and I appreciate it. I know we really threw it on you, and it came out of another discussion of expanding a contract that was already expired, and we were sort of between a rock and a hard spot, and this was put together very, very quickly. So I truly appreciate that, and I understand that. But this is a conversation that's well overdue, and the timing is right. It's ripe for discussion prior to putting out an RFP, but also to understand the space of what defines fraud and abuse in the workers' comp field. What types of investigations and investigators do we have, and kind of expertise? Where do we look for best practices in uncovering and fixing and correcting these issues? Because I will tell you, there's nothing worse that gives a bad name to the hardworking men and women of this city than 1 or 2 or 5 or so many individuals that are out there abusing or defrauding the taxpayers in this space. And so it's up to us. This is sort of where the buck stops, to ask these questions, to understand it, to redefine it, and then ensure that we close every and all loopholes and go after and prosecute every one of those individuals. And so that I would suggest from the chair, perhaps this is something where we could perhaps table it here until we can get our arms around and working very closely with personnel, and maybe even the controller's office, because they conduct audits. And what is it we should even be asking and looking for, and start going down a different path of conversation and dialogue to fix what are clear in my mind, much more abuse than we've ever discovered. Certainly if there's only 2 people that have been, and I would love to be found wrong, that we've overturned every single stone and found no abuses at all, and these two convictions were incredibly unique. I'm just guessing that's not the case.
Well, and I would add there was one graph that was particularly damning that shows folks pre-drop that they had a sort of a hill of workers' comp claims. And then on the day they start drop, everybody's okay. And then the day after, it's this hill again of increasing claims. I would say anybody that claimed to be ill, claimed to be mysteriously better for the day that we currently allow in policy, and then magically there's suddenly that hill again. Just by nature, there's a lot of fraud in there. Whether we can identify who among those have created their own circumstance or defrauded us by claiming to be healthy at the day they start to drop when they've done this and then they've done that. Obviously, there are dozens, if not hundreds of cases that aren't honest workers' comp cases just by those numbers. So I don't know how we get at that, because there obviously will be a mix of perfectly legitimate cases in between. But we know something's going on just by that graph.
You've described a perfect red flag, and those are the things that we look for, Councilman.
So, and that's what I was going to ask about, like, what are the flags? What do we look for? How often do we look? Do we reflag and reopen a file every 6 months if it hadn't been flagged? Do we only look at it once? I mean, this goes beyond sort of a discussion and a full report and an analysis, and probably maybe even looking at an outside expert to work with us in the personnel department to figure out what that is. And that's what I might suggest is we, and it's not just drop, quite frankly. I mean, that was the most recent and glaring and easy to see and graph out.
It's probably the biggest red flag we have, but there are others.
I think there are probably many, but that's certainly one of the biggest and one of the most recent. But and we saw the significant change with that when the change was made. Prior to that, it was you can go on drop while you were on disability, and now in an effort to clean up the disability side of the equation, they said you've got to be in I guess working health when you sign up or you start drop. So it cleared up the disability part of the issue, and then moved all those people over to the workers' comp side of the equation. So it really didn't fix anything outside of shuffling the deck. But I think there's other issues here in terms of just abuse and fraud, period. And what does that mean? And how do we flag them? And how are we holding our providers accountable? Or what kinds of specialists do we have in the city that actually just focus on this? And I guess I'm going towards the idea of getting a report back from the personnel department to report back to the committee on what their recommendations would be in moving forward with that discussion, with that type of forensic audit, and detailed explanations of what all the aforementioned are, with descriptions. What are flags? What are, how does the entire process work? I think we've got to rip this thing apart in a lot of different ways and do it with some method to the madness, so we end up in a place of a good RFP and cleaning up these issues once and for all.
We would like to do that with the city attorney as well.
That'd be great, yeah. That would be my suggestion.
And I don't know what personnel thinks if including the city controller's office would be helpful or not necessary.
We're happy to reach out to them to see if
They can help audit the program in general as well.
that can be helpful. Yeah.
Any other comments, Mr. Price?
I would like to ask if, before we close that discussion, if I could, if the CLA's office has any other additional suggestions or input on that.
No.
Okay.
If we have anything, we can certainly provide that to you.
So how would you word this as a motion.
So I would move that we instruct the Personnel Department and request the City Attorney's Office to work with them and come back with a framework of a report on what elements to look into, possible workers' comp fraud and abuse, with a detailed and comprehensive forensic audit, and then provide guidelines as to changes and recommendations, and how we can adopt them into a new RFP for our future providers. Don't ask me to repeat that.
Hopefully everybody got it. And I assume this motion has to go to full council.
Yeah.
So we will direct that and move it there along with the CAO report without objection.
Okay, so just for clarification, you're moving this report with that recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to item number 1.
Item number 1 is a motion, corrects Harris Dawson, and a Personnel Department report relative to recommendations for modifying the targeted local hire program to improve participation by all city departments.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Vincent Cordero with the Personnel Department. I am joined by the Honorable Jackie Goldberg and Melissa Fleming from the CAO's office.
And if we could ask that our colleague, Mr. Harris Dawson, pull up a chair and join us here as well.
Thank you. I would like to provide a brief summary report on staff's review of possible steps to improve departmental participation in the TLH program. The motion included several proposed methods to increase participation, including utilizing TLH to applicable contract work, converting as-needed positions to full-time positions, and allowing departments to receive department-specific referrals for existing part-time staff. The feasibility of each of these items was analyzed within the report, and steps were provided to achieve their implementation with the assistance of the CAO and CLA. It is recommended that the item related to contracts and conversion of part-time to full-time positions be referred to the Strategic Workforce Development Task Force for further discussion and analysis. There are numerous budgetary considerations in determining the budgetary impact of utilizing contract and part-time employees. Recommendations related to contracting and the addition of full-time positions is typically reviewed as part of the city's annual budget process. And once the positions have been created and approved through the budget process, TLH can provide candidates to potentially fill those positions, which have been designated as TLH entry-level positions. It is also recommended that the concept of department-specific referrals be referred to the TLH working group, since any substantive changes to the TLH program framework would require the working group to agree upon those changes. The specifics of candidate referrals are covered by the current letter of agreement that created the TLH and would require the TLH working group to consider how part-time employees are currently hired and how departments would determine which part-time employees would be referred through TLH. Currently, the program enables part-time staff to receive referrals directly from their department instead of receiving an assessment of job readiness from an outside agency. This is a streamlined process that enables them to join the TLH candidate pool. The ongoing commitment of the mayor and the city council has resulted in an increase in participation from all city departments. As of December 31st, 2017, 22 city departments have now submitted requests to fill vacancies with TLH candidates, and thus far have made 197 hires. The personnel department will also continue to work with departments in expanding the TLH program to other classifications. For example, the personnel department worked with animal services to create animal care assistant, which will be a transitional class between vocational worker and animal care tech. This new classification will provide additional opportunities to candidates in our pool, and the Personnel Department will continue to provide reporting for TLH hires and track city department participation as instructed. Thank you.
Ms.
Good
Goldberg?
afternoon. My name is Jackie Goldberg. I chair the work group These considerations have not actually been taken up by the work group. We intend to do that at our very next meeting to see if there are further things that can be fleshed out. I think the group will be also interested, in addition to animal services, to the CIR position in the call center, since we're continuously trying to find enough people to do that, and it's not too dissimilar. Although there is the problem that's noted in the text that says that you have one category that isn't able to dispatch, it might be a problem. But there are places where there's no dispatching going on in the call center, so those would be probably better targets. I think that probably the key question is how to make it possible for it to be cost neutral to use city employees versus, or even a cost savings, versus contract people. If you have to hire administrative personnel to supervise the job, and if you have to hire people to train, which we as the work group never took into account as to how we were doing these things, did the 197 that have been hired require additional costs? That would be a question I think we need to find out. How much did it cost departments to do the 197? We've been very successful. Almost nobody has been either turned out or quit. Not none, but pretty close to zero. So we've got the right people, and they're learning the jobs, and they're doing them. So what were those costs? We don't know that. I think we need to find that out, because this report indicates that if you're going to take folks out of contract services and bring those jobs in, there are additional costs. Well, of course there are costs, but are they less or more than the costs? We went through this. We went through this when we were talking about who should clean the library's toilets and who should do the ones in the harbor. And we went through that. We've been through this. And it turns out that most of the time there are not very many new costs, because even a person off a civil service list gets training in the specifics of the job in that particular department. If you're an administrative clerk in one department, it's not exactly the same job as in a different department. And each department, we have found, have different ways of processing all of the millions of documents that cities are required to have. So I think there's a lot here. I commend the personnel department for coming up with all of these alternatives. I do think that we need to flesh them out, particularly as to cost. Most of the work group, and I believe all of the civilian employees, are very concerned that we look quickly to things like tree cutting and tree services, because there are big needs in the city. There are going to be a lot of people hired. If in fact it's going to be done by contractors, a lot of us personally believe that that's going to be too costly and they're not going to do a very good job, that we'd be better hiring a few people who are real tree surgeons and have them create a workforce within the city from targeted local higher entry level positions, and really go around and really take care of. I mean, I don't know about your neighborhood, but my neighborhood is sorely needing attention to trees. Same thing with curb cuts. We think we have 20 or 30 years of them. This is not a temporary job. We have 20 or 30 years of street resurfacing. That's not a temporary job. I understand fully the need not to hire permanent people for jobs that are going to disappear in a year or two. But we have such backload of infrastructure and such backload of things that we're legally required to do, including fulfill our requirements with the ADA, Disabilities Act. I think that it's important that somehow or another, this committee and others get their arms around what are the actual costs of bringing those jobs in, because there's certainly quite a number of them to be had, and they would be, I think, a part of creating a new permanent way of dealing with the infrastructure needs of the city.
Certainly my experience has been exactly what you talked about with tree trimming,
I remember that from when
where
I was
the
here.
contractors, after many years of people begging us to come and trim their trees, the contractors did such an expensive and poor job that people were harassing us for the terrible job they'd done destroying the trees in their neighborhood, and that they wish they'd never had them trimmed, which is not the experience we're looking for with our own well-trained crews, we never got complaints that I recall about trees being trimmed badly. So the fact the contractors realized they were the only game in town and started increasing their prices, I think at some point we lose money and get bad service at the same time. This is an opportunity for us to have substantial local hire opportunities, and provide a much better service to our constituents.
So basically, as I said, I just want to commend Personnel Department for this report because it really outlines many places we could go to increase dramatically the number of people hired through the Targeted Local Hire Program.
Any other comments from staff? Mr. Harris Dawson, would you like to?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members, for allowing me to be a part of this hearing, and congratulations to the Personnel Department and the working group. It feels like we actually finally have some momentum in this program. I remember the first couple of months that led the chairman and I to put forward this motion. We'd come in with single-digit reports, or reports in the low teens. And now it seems like at least dozens of people are being hired at a time. And, based on our interviews with departments, almost every department is really happy with the people that they've been able to hire. One point of concern that we have heard, in addition to the issue around contracts that you all just went over, is the sort of lack of transparency around the availability of positions, right? So the council and mayor fund a department for a number of positions, and then, we kind of wait for those people to get hired, and then they don't get hired, and then we hear, oh, it was, what do they call, authorizations. So if there's a way that we can know what the authorizations are, so we can have some predictability about what the jobs will be, but also what the services will be. Because remember, this thing has, for us, is two-pronged. One is residents being able to pick up the phone and say, we've got this problem in medians or on sidewalks or with lighting, and expect that the city has people available to work on that in a reasonable amount of time, and that those people are people in communities that have had challenges with jobs. So we'd be very curious about that. And, just to add a little bit before I stop to hear the answers about the contracting, there's the example that the chairman raised about people doing bad work. In our district, and I think this contractor was serving Council District 9 too, they just quit. They just came in and said, oh, we can't find people to do the contract. We're giving it back to the city. So in that case, you really are in a bad position because there's not even a contractor to go to. And again, we have people out there who could be working that the money has been allocated to hire them. All we have to do is execute that transition, get them trained, and get them out on the job.
And I'm not sure which contractor you were talking about, but I know in my district, the contractor in charge of the medians just disappeared. And we had 2 or 3 foot high weeds, and people started to put inappropriate signs in them, like, city too busy helping illegal aliens to trim their medians. I was just really reprehensible, and we don't really want to be in that position again.
And I could add to that. I mean, certainly, and I remember all the horror stories with the tree trimming, and it wasn't trimming. It was, I can't even describe what they did.
Hacking.
Hacking. But I've also had good experiences as well to be put out there. A lot of good experiences, in fact. For years, we've contracted with nonprofits, at-risk youth programs, North Valley, so many others, New Directions for Youth that do graffiti abatement and weed abatement.
Yeah.
Phenomenal work at a fraction of the cost, getting at-risk youth off the streets, career ready and trained. Scores of programs that we've worked with directly out of our council office, that we funded out of our council office, that have really done a phenomenal job in goes all the way down the list from a lot of different city services. So there's a good side of it too. It's not, all that it's doom and gloom. I would say that we look at it through a couple different lenses. Certainly the core city functions that are always going to have to be needed, as you eloquently stated, from repairing all of the ADA compliance issues. Those are going to be ongoing for decades. At the same time, we're also looking at, right now, a study in bringing back the conversation of SOS LA, which was the Save Our Streets and Sidewalks for LA, and trying to take advantage of some of the new revenue streams, for example, from SB1, local return, Measure M, and doing a jump start and a borrowing to get some of the infrastructure done in the next 10 years, because we save so much money by doing it on it's good borrowing. In fact, Anderson School did a phenomenal report on this, that it's very good borrowing, and it's a great investment in infrastructure. Puts people to work, but more importantly, it saves not only the taxpayers' money, but the commuters and our liability accounts from trip and falls. The cost of car maintenance and repair, for example, we're the highest in the country at roughly $900 a year for maintenance on a vehicle. So with all, which is regressive, but with all of that, that isn't necessarily long term. We will forever have to maintain, no doubt. We're going to have to staff up and then staff right back down if we put a program like that in place, albeit with PLAs and project labor agreements, which I was happy to shepherd and bring through and introduce through Public Works. But with all of that, there's definitely a conversation to be had, not to close the door, and actually put Angelinos into work programs, working for themselves, if you will. Working for the city is working for yourself, right? So that's who we represent. So just to point out, yeah, there are absolutely horrific horror stories and nightmares that we've been through as well, but there's also good public-private partnerships that we have to be mindful of, and I don't think we've done enough and a good job of expanding those.
Now, I'm not sure if Mr. Harris Dawson had an unanswered question.
Yes, about the authorized and unauthorized authorizations, they're
Above
called.
my pay grade.
Yes.
Melissa Fleming with the CAO. I'm not sure what you're specifically referencing. So when a department often will get new position authorities, let's say in the budget process, if there are those new position authorities that they get, there is a process they have to go through in order to ensure that position authority is allocated through the Civil Service Commission. Once that happens, then they go through the process of actually filling those, whether that be through the Chartered Local Hire Program or through a typical civil service process. So I'm not sure what you mean specifically associated with the
How do we know what's
once the positions are filled, or
once they're authorized?
So
I'll give if I give an example, it'll be more clear. So all of us will often sit in council, and there will be the unfortunate case of a lawsuit, and we will say to a department, well, you could have fixed this problem because you had we funded you for 40 more people than you have. And then that person says to us, oh, well, you funded that, but we weren't authorized for that, which is, we didn't have the authorizations to actually do those hires, that's the way it's done administratively is fine. But from a policymaker's point of view, there needs to be transparency on that, because we don't want to target local hiring people saying, oh, this department has this many positions, and in fact they don't.
So the way the current process is that if a department wants to fill a position, effectively all they need is that position authority that's been allocated by the Civil Service Commission, and then they can go through that process. There is a process that the CAO has to effectively approve the hiring of that position in our payroll system, but our staff have been directed to authorize those approvals as long as the department has an authorized vacant position available to fill. So there shouldn't be a situation in which a department would be saying, I don't have the authority to fill. The only situation you would see that is if a department doesn't have sufficient funding in order to fill all of the available positions within their department. sometimes departments have unfunded position authorities or something of that nature, in which case they may not have sufficient salary funds available for all of the positions they have within the department.
But we do hear about circumstances where positions were funded and then they weren't authorized. So how do we, which sounds a lot like the managed hiring that we thought we got rid of years ago, and we're always trying to find and root out. Are we sure that that isn't still happening?
I would be happy to explore with your office in a little more detail. I can tell you from the CAO's perspective and what our management has directed our staff is simply to the effect of if a department has a vacant position authority within the department that's available, a vacant position authority, that position should be approved.
But there is salary savings.
Yes.
Right. So there are numbers. So departments obviously have to live within their means. If they have salary funding available, there are situations, as Ms. Goldberg mentioned, salary savings rates within departments. They may not have sufficient funding available for every position, and then that situation, it's up to department management to make the prioritization as far as which positions to fill to ensure they live within their salary amount.
I got a quick question on that. If we take a narrow dive into this, as an example, if a department has funding, not for salaries, but for programmatic, actual services, I'll give you an example. If we fund so many lanes to be repaved and reconstructed in a calendar year, and if at the end of that year, prior to the closure of that fiscal year, there's still money left over, but there's more time to do the work, but they don't have enough staff to do it. That might be an opportunity where, if you will, that contracting with PLA makes sense. In fact, in the last several years, as an example of this, Bureau of Street Services have given tens of millions of dollars back in the last several years to the general fund because they had money left over, but not the personnel to complete. They didn't have enough staff, and we couldn't staff up more necessarily, but they had more funds because they're allocated for a certain number of street miles. So they completed the street miles. In other words, they did such a great job that they did it on time and under budget, but there was still more money left over, but not enough staff to do more work. So we could have done more every year, more streets, put more people to work without increasing the city workforce, right? And because that might not be the case every year.
And one of the advantages of the targeted local hiring program is that we have people queued up to be hired if they're entry-level positions immediately.
And so with that, this is that type of work.
That's what I'm saying.
The interesting thing to me is, if you look at the report, turn your attention to the report, what caught me is, let me see here. On the chart, it actually walks through who and what departments, how many requests submitted, request positions fulfilled, number of hires, except that sort of conflicts with the summary, which says here, in the summary it spells out, in this report, the Personnel Department noted that as December 31st, 2017, 22 city departments and bureaus have hired 197 individuals. So that was in a 6-month period, right? I believe that was since July through December. But then it references in that closing paragraph, personnel reports, however, that the public works bureaus combined have only hired 13 individuals through the targeted local hire. Yet from my calculation and looking at the number of hires and opportunities and the type of works we're looking for targeted local hire, the biggest opportunity in all of our departments would be the Department of Public Works bureaus. That's the type of staff. But yet they had the fewest number of. In fact, I think it was Councilmember Harris Dawson who, in his opening, said it's great to see finally double digits coming back in big numbers. Except these are all the bureaus combined. These are less than double digits at 13 because they're all combined.
Right, all in single digits. Yeah.
And so, if this is the department that has the most opportunity yet has done the least, how do we get them to do more.
And I had that same question and concern as well. I don't know if there's any representative from Public Works here that can speak to that directly.
And just added to that, you know, the biggest public works projects we have, you know, infrastructure projects, trimming trees, sidewalk repair, are problems that are going to go on for the next 20, 30 years. And we just can't rely on youth, you know, our nonprofits that we work with so well. And they do a great job. We cannot just rely on that segment to meet this need.
And-
We've got to find ways to bring these departments around in ways that are really meaningful.
And eventually, those young people at those community organizations need a grown-up job, right? So, which is the other reason why we want to open them up, and they have the training to do it and have been doing the work. Mr. Chair, I've got to get to homelessness committee, which I chair, which is in some ways the other side of this problem that we're talking about. But I wanted to ask you to join or ask you to bring forward an instruction that we actually get an accounting of what the positions are, which ones are funded, which ones are unfunded, so we can have some predictability because like all of you on the committee, we have the same concern. We expected the biggest numbers to be coming from the bureaus, and instead the opposite is happening. As we talk to the departments, they have vacancies, and we're just wondering what it takes to get those. One, to confirm that they're real vacancies that they intend to fill. Let me say it that way, and how we connect those and make sure that they're coming through. As many as possible come through the targeted local hire program.
I think we'll include that as part of the motion that we come up with eventually.
Councilmember, just to add one other thing too, and this had come up at a previous meeting with regard to the public works programs, and that is some departments hire through vocational worker programs and other programs that may be similar to targeted local hire but wouldn't be reflected here. And I think that's one of the things that came up as something that could be addressed.
There is a relationship between some public works departments and Trade Tech College, for example, and they hire directly from them and so forth and so on. And they're similar programs. However, those folks, generally speaking, have to go through some civil service process, and so some of them don't actually get to become permanent. We lose a number of them. Others don't. But particularly, you have sanitation that hired 21, 25, 26, 33 positions. Not one was from targeted local hiring. 21 administrative clerk, all off of lists. I think, street services, 24% of their hires were from targeted local hiring. Sanitation, 0. Street lighting.
Sanitation was 0?
Yeah, sanitation had no targeted local hires. They had 21, 25, 26, 33 positions they filled in 2017 between February and November 30th. Not one of them was from the targeted local hire. 21 from administrative clerk, 4 custodians, 1 gardener caretaker, and 7 maintenance laborers, but they were all non-TLH.
I do want to note that we did get a request recently from sanitation, and they're in the process of hiring 4 individuals for office training. So
Good.
they started
That's
to utilize the program recently,
Good.
past the date of this.
This
So
second
do we-
report that you got has all these statistics. So
Got it.
Do we have any numbers for the current year yet? When we're almost done with 2 months, whether we've gotten better participation in 2018?
Yeah, we just barely finished up, so this is very preliminary. We have 216 hires as of January 31st, and as I mentioned, sanitation did hire about 5, I corrected, 5 individuals as office trainees recently. Street lighting has 1 vocational worker. Street services has 9 office trainees, and this is not reflected in the other report you have ending November 30th.
So the 200 isn't from just that month. That's
no,
since
it's
the program
it's
started.
19.
That's
The number is 19. It was added to the 197 to bring it
It's
to
cumulative,
216.
so it's 216 now is the total, the running total.
And have we heard from any of the intake centers that we have procedural or policy problems that are getting in the way with targeted local hire?
We have quarterly meetings with our application sites, and we receive feedback from them as well as provide feedback to them. The issues have been very minimal.
Very minimal.
Ms. Goldberg attends those meetings as well.
Actually, they're in terms of processing applicants into the applicant pool, it is running very smoothly. All the participants, whether they're the designated referral agencies, which are the myriad, about 120 community-based organizations that we've personally visited in the last 18 months, some of them have chosen to be designated referral services agencies. So their folks get processed immediately by the WorkSource Center application centers because they've already done all of the things to verify that they're ready to work and ready to be in this pool. So we get them, most of the referrals are coming from them.
From the workforce centers?
To the workforce centers, to the 9 that we've identified as the application centers. And we identified specific ones because of both geography and because of their past history in being able to find jobs for the more difficult to find jobs for people who are on probation or so forth and so on. So I think our problem is, as I say it to every report that I write, is jobs. We've got people. We've got about 3,000 people in the pipeline ready to go.
So we haven't needed to do any additional outreach. It sounds like we have more people than we could ever use.
Actually, not to do. We had planned a kind of a pretty big splash. Come on, y'all. We've decided not to do that because with 200 hires and 3,000 people ready to go, if you put too many people in the application pool, your chances of ever getting a call become so small you think you might be on a list that will never happen, and then you get discouraged.
It's already small if we have 3,000 people.
That's right. That's right. So what we're relying on are basically the community-based organizations who have been our funnel from the beginning, know about the program because we visited them individually, and they are still referring people, but basically what we need is jobs. I mean, if you take a look just at a few of the statistics in this report, the second report you got for today's meeting, which shows the numbers game, it's very easy to see that of the 170 hires that were done by TLH in this report, 345 additional people were hired in those same categories, but not through TLH. So it's about a third. We'd like to get that up to about 2/3.
So of the categories that we do hire from in the targeted local hire, about a third, you said, are going into targeted local hire, and the rest are coming through traditional means.
Exactly.
So have we looked at how to get those numbers up?
Well, that's sort of our next committee meeting of the workforce, is to try to find out and identify where the problems are and why some departments, if you take a look at that same chart, you can see that some departments have like 70% of their hires, 80% of their hires, 100% of their hires are from targeted local hiring, and others are at 0. They've hired people, but 0 came from it, or 18%. Building and safety, 18%. Cultural affairs, 0. Civilian fire, 0. General Services Department, that's one of our target departments, hired only 13 people, of which 12 were not targeted local hiring. 1 TLH, that's 8%. Housing is 28%. Libraries, 23%. Most of public works are either 0 except for street lighting. Only hired 2 people, and both of them were targeted local hiring people. They got 100%. So you can take a look at these charts that we've given you. You can see that there are some departments that are actively pursuing targeted local hiring and others not. And we're not sure why. But I will say this, because the experience has been so positive by the people who've done the hiring, we do expect these numbers to increase, the percentages to increase.
The experience has been so positive, it's kind of mystifying to me that some departments are lagging so far behind.
Yes.
Yes. Any other
Change is
comments?
always easiest when you're telling someone else to do it,
Yes.
however.
Yes. Any other comments? If not, we have two speakers from the public. Carmen Hayes Walker, to be followed by Teresa Sanchez.
We don't need to stay up here, right?
No. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm at a total loss
Identify
after
yourself.
this report. Carmen Hayes Walker, President AFSCME Local 3090. I can't imagine what entry-level clerical position could not be appropriate for this program. When I was hired, you took a test. 40 words a minute and a high school diploma was all that was required. You took a test, you went to an interview, and you were hired, and you were trained on the job. This is basically the same thing, except you're being trained on the job as a testing process, which even makes it better. I can't imagine what is the holdup with the departments, and I would ask that you ask the departments to actually put a line in their budget to say exactly how many positions that they're going to utilize this program for in hiring in their budgets for 2018.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and committee members. I'm Teresa Sanchez with AFSCME District Council 36. With all due respect to the Personnel Department, this report is completely unresponsive to the intent of the motion. The questions that were revealed in the discussion that you just had with Ms. Goldberg and other committee members and Mr. Marquis Harris-Dawson was getting to why are departments not utilizing the program? Why are we still contracting out frontline day-to-day service work? Why are we still relying on as-needed staff? Why are we still using 1/3 of civil service employees in the sanitation call center, 1/3 contract workers, and 1/3 as-needed workers after years and years of running and building the same programs and growing the programs in sanitation, not to mention 311, not to mention in Bureau of Sanitation, refuse collection, wastewater collection, clean streets. This report was supposed to get at just what you've asked, Mr. Chair and committee members. Why are departments not utilizing the program? Thank you.
Thank you.
I punched my card in outside. Is that okay if I?
Well, yes. We
Hi.
will trust you.
Thank you. I'm Molly
Yes,
Rhodes.
you're on my.
You can see me.
I see you
Okay,
now.
great. Molly Rhodes, SEIU 721. Wanted to echo my sisters. Also, I just wanted to flag for general services, they want to contract out all the custodial work, essentially, and it's $6 million of contracting. We've filed an objection to it because I went through the notification process. So we've objected to it in the legal channels, but we would very much like to just figure out how can we do this in this next budget.
And have they given you any justification for that?
Initially, the department was just like, no, we don't want to. And then we filed for arbitration, and now there's going to be a discussion. But so.
And those positions easily could be
They're automatically.
targeted local
I
hire.
mean, they're already vocational workers anyway. They're always vocational workers. So it's like this huge pool of work that's an entry-level work that can get integrated.
And it seems like some of this could be looked for in the budget process as well this year. So we can be more on that in that process.
Thank you.
Mr. Englander, any other comments? So if I can get this to work, we have wording for Mr. Harris-Dawson's motion, or our best attempt to capture it. So I would ask that we instruct the CAO with assistance from the Personnel Department to prepare a report on the number of funded and unfunded position authorities by classification in each department, including those which are held vacant for budgetary reasons. Additionally, the report should provide information as to which positions can be filled through the targeted local hire program. So that's my best sense of his motion. I would ask that be advanced forward to the council without objection. Otherwise, I think these proposals should be sent for some more feedback. And so I would refer personnel's proposals A and F to the Strategic Workforce Development Task Force, and proposals B, C, D, and E to the Targeted Local Hire Working Group for consideration, and ask them to report back to this committee within 30 to 60 days with recommendations on these proposals. And then we will bring those after discussion to full council. But in the meantime, we will hold this item in committee with the exception of the motion originally made by Mr. Harris Dawson. So we will move all of that without objection.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm sorry, for clarification, are you continuing this item, or are we moving the
We are
report?
continuing the item with the direction for feedback from the task force and the working group as directed, but we are moving the motion forward to council.
And the motion will have the Councilmember Harris Dawson's recommendation also. Is that
Well,
correct?
I think that was my attempt to capture it. I don't know if there was anything in his that wasn't in the motion that I moved forward. So if you find an element in your records that was not what I attempted to capture, then I'd ask you to add that in.
Okay, so we're moving the motion, the recommendations from the motion, including the recommendation from Councilmember Harris Dawson
Yes.
to council, but we're continuing the report back for a report back.
Yes, and
So-
we'll give you the wording of this. You can compare it to the record and see if there's any element that we missed of what he suggested.
Okay, because it's just confusing because the item, is it moving forward or is it being continued?
The item is being continued. That separate motion is moving forward to council if we're able to do that.
The way I understand it, it's kind of being split. The report from the Personnel Department is being divided up and sent back to the two different working groups.
Yes.
But the motion is being approved as amended with Mr. Harris Dawson's suggested changes, and that's going forward to council.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you. I got it now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that is moved forward without objection. Lastly, item number 2.
Item number 2, Personnel Department report relative to a report back regarding implementation, benchmarks, and hiring goals for the Targeted Local Hiring and Strategic Workforce Development Task Force.
And if we could ask for an overview of the report.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Vince Cordero with the Personnel Department, and I would like to provide you with a brief update on the hiring goals for the Target Local Hire Program. In September of 2017, we reported that 25% of the hires in the 6 classifications, which are currently part of Target Local Hire, which includes admin clerk, custodian, garage attendant, gardener caretaker, maintenance laborer, and tree surgeon assistant, were made from the TLH program for a total of 87 appointments. As of November 30th, 2017, we have increased it to 33%, which represents 170 of the 515 hires made in the 6 classifications. The other 345 appointments were from civil service eligible list. Admin clerk and custodian continue to be the largest classifications utilized by the departments. Department participation has also increased since this report was last completed. We have since received requests from Public Works Sanitation, CAO, and Fire. They have either hired TLH candidates or in the selection process currently. We will continue to provide updates of TLH utilization by departments to this committee as instructed. Thank you.
So now that the program is fully launched, personnel, Ms. Goldberg, do you think there are modifications or changes to the program that could improve participation that are obvious to you?
Well, an obvious one would be that as lists for these 6 positions that exist expire, no new tests should be given. Then the only source will be targeted local hire. I don't know if you can do that, but if you can do that, that would mean that as they look at forward, we have current lists. They're going to use people off those lists. Many people have done it this way forever, and that's what they're going to do. And you can see it in page 2 of this list as you take a look at each category and how many were done by other civil service versus how many done by targeted local hire. But those lists expire. And when those lists expire, perhaps we don't give another administrative clerk test, or we don't give another custodial or garage attendant test. Then the only source will be target local hire. That's pretty drastic, but that's one way to do it. Other possibilities would be to invite departments that have primarily used other civil service hires rather than TLH to this committee to inquire from them what would make it easier for them to use targeted local hiring. Maybe there are barriers that they have not communicated to us. I think that's certainly possible. What are those barriers? How can we remove them? That's something obviously policymakers would have something to do with, would be removing barriers to make it easier to use targeted local hire than to go off of lists. And the third area would be really to take a look at contracts. And I know that's probably a budget committee issue rather than personnel, but it used to be both. And I think that at some point or another, we had this same problem when I was on the council, and that was a long time ago because I left in 2000, so that's quite a while ago. But we had the same issue of contracting out custodial services. And what we found out is that these low bids were low bids because they weren't hiring enough people. And so the library and the child care center at the harbor, which were the first 2 contracted out ones while I was on personnel committee, both failed because every day we got complaints that the bathrooms weren't clean enough. And the way they got a nice low bid was to just not hire enough people. That's not useful. So we ended up getting rid of both of those and bringing them back inside. Before we go way out and have a whole bunch of contract services and go through this kind of process again, because we had it repeated over and over again with libraries and other places where we had contracted, I think that some council committee might want to examine what has been the experience of contracting out some of these services in more recent times. Maybe 18 years ago, it was worse than it is now, and now you have wonderful, inexpensive contractors. That's a different question. They were inexpensive, but they weren't any good. They were inexpensive not because they were doing a better job of managing their labor, they just weren't hiring enough people. So I think that there is a role to be played by the council in oversight as well as the Public Works Commission in taking a look at what really is a reasonable thing to contract out. Obviously, you don't want to have a job brought in and hire new people if it's going to last a year or 2. Then you're just laying people off. This is not something any of us ever wanted to do when I was on council. I'm sure none of you do either. So I'm not saying it's every contract. But there are contracts which we know are long-term. Curb cuts are long-term. You're going to be making curb cuts in the city for a long time to come to meet ADA requirements. There should be some way of assessing whether or not we can begin to build a workforce to do that. Same thing with tree cutting and so forth and so on. Others, part-time issues are another big issue. And as needed is probably the biggest one that I think should be explored thoroughly, because as needed makes sense if it really is short term. Most of our call centers use a lot of as needed people. Frankly, in my opinion personally, most of the as needed people are not as needed people. They're just a way of keeping them on a short string. And that's because those centers are busy all the time. They're always going to need people to be there permanently, not part-time. So I'm saying I think an assessment, a real-life assessment of contract work really needs to be done. We did it. We've done it probably every 10 years or so in city council. At least that's what I was told when I was trying to do it when I was here. But I think without some realistic assessment of what makes sense, there are jobs in rec and parks that will always be part-time. or seasonal, because in the summer there are many more programs. But there are some that are not seasonal and probably should have full-time positions. I think a real examination of this process was supposed to have been done by the department's management in their reports to the mayor about how we're going to go forward. I think we need to be using those reports and seeing whether there was a realistic assessment of what needs to be full-time, permanent, what needs to be as needed, how often, how many, what needs to be part-time, because it is, only part-time work. It just can't make it full-time. Without those kinds of assessments, department by department, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, for people to change behaviors that have always been the way we've always done it, I mean, really, what they told me when I first got into elected office, that there were two answers in government, and finally a third one. We've never done it that way. We've always done it that way. And the third one was new when I came in 93, was we tried that once and it didn't work. So, and those were the three answers that meant we're not going to change anything. Well, I think there's a sense of change in this building. I really do. I think there are a lot of people in departments who want to make this happen. You can see it. 197 hires, 216 now. That's progress. We don't want to deny that, but we want to amp it up, and I think there are some things that can be done to do that.
Mr. Englander, any questions?
Just
comments?
add, if we ever do, and we should periodically do a look back and an analysis of what works and what doesn't. Not simply the answer of we tried it once and it didn't work.
Right.
Totally agree. You hit it spot on. But I think also in that same breath, we've got to look at the contracting procedures themselves are horribly flawed. I mean, the fact that we hire lowest bid period is a joke.
Yeah.
It's a disservice to the taxpayers. It's a disservice to city employees. It's a disservice to everyone. It
Used
should be
to say lowest qualified.
well. It's easy to get qualified,
Yeah.
and
Maybe that's the problem, though.
well, no, not necessarily. We've made it more complicated and costly.
Oh.
But it's lowest bid, and a lot of those bids don't come across with clarity and expectations of performance, and then that's really where we hit a brick wall. We certainly see it with a lot of the large scale construction projects and infrastructure projects where you get a lot of low invest bid, and turns out that the change orders cost more than.
Yes.
I mean, there are billionaire contractors in the state of California who are well known for this.
Right.
But when you go down to your example of janitors and tree trimmers, a lot of the contracts are written without the clarity and understanding also as the expectation of service delivery. And it's, and so a lot of it, I think, has to go into, there will always be some kind of public-private partnership with nonprofits and others.
And it makes sense.
In certain places. So I think the examination of both periodically should be done. But in the way and the manner of which we also contract has been always driven by price and not by performance, and awarded that way. And that's been the mistake for decades. And anyway.
And with some irony, I'm pretty sure we checked this years ago during the time period where we were broker, and we found that while we choose between contractors that way, there actually isn't a requirement that if we contract out that we save money doing it. So the city does not require it to be a savings. It can be for whatever random area. And I think
that would be a good policy change.
I think that would be a good policy change. I don't know that we have representatives from some of the other departments that have had a low participation rate. Anybody here from building and safety, housing, library, or rec and parks that are prepared to speak to their low participation rates?
I do want to add, though, that library and building safety have been hiring quite a bit in the past couple months since this report was done, so we've seen an uptick in those two departments.
We should bring you the revised before this process gets too far. But yes, some of them, there were early starters, the airport, boom, right off the bat, okay, and a couple of others. And then there were some who kind of came in the second tier. And now at the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, we have a whole bunch that were, I think, more reluctant who are now beginning to come forward. The question then does become one that's been tossed around here. How many jobs really are there available to fill? And how many of them are you planning to contract out? Those are the two big questions. If we can get answers, good answers to both of those, then we can examine whether, in my opinion, whether the contracting out makes sense or not, both as to what the costs are and secondly as to whether or not the contractors will stick around. I mean, if the tree trimming people leave, or if the median care people get a contract and leave, it may tell us something that those need to be city jobs because as I tell people all the time, when we had the last big earthquake was right after I got into office, and not a single contract employee showed up in my district to help. But everybody who was a city employee came. And that's the difference, really, in my opinion. The city employees care about the city. They're a part of this family. And so that's why I've always been such an advocate for only contracting out those things that really make sense. Everything else, we do much better with our own people. In an emergency, they show up, they're there. And in an emergency, the others are just contract employees to some other person, job, company. Anyway, pardon my editorializing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
We seem to be having the same discussions that we had 17 years ago all over again. And it's time, I think, to find a different approach to figuring out what contracting makes sense and what doesn't, what as needed makes sense and what doesn't.
For the record, I do want to provide an update on those departments you mentioned there. Building safety, as of January 31st, has 10 hires, all office trainees. Housing has 16 hires, all office trainees. And library has 25 hires, which are all office trainees, which is our largest user of office trainee now. So they've definitely moved ahead of the pack.
And those are all using targeted local hires.
Correct.
We'll send you this information.
So Rec and Parks?
Rec and Parks is now at 20, 8 office trainees, 12 vocational workers.
So any remaining departments left that you consider sort of red flag non-participants among the larger departments?
Housing.
Housing, they're up to 16 hires now.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They're starting to utilize the program pretty much.
I think maybe wait a month. Let's see if these trends continue. Because if they are, we certainly don't want to have people who are moving in the right direction to feel like we're not recognizing that they're moving in the right direction.
Well, if we could have you come back in a month and
absolutely
report on particularly the laggards in this arena.
We'll be glad to provide a new report.
All right. Well, for now, I would ask that we note and file the Personnel Department report without objection. And item number 7, I don't think we've received a clarification, but I would just move that item forward if we have not. And just ask that we confirm before it goes to council that it was correct that it is for an administrative deputy controller.
Did you do item number 5?
Did we do item number 5? I don't believe we have. So let's do that last one, item number 5.
Item number 5 is a mayor report relative to the position exemption of one deputy superintendent of building for the Department of Building and Safety.
Anybody here to speak to this item? Yeah, there's some inconsistencies in the items, so I need to be able to ask some questions about it. So I'll ask that we continue item 5 until the next meeting of Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, there is a time limit on this item.
What's the time limit?
March 2nd.
Okay, we'll hold it in committee, and once we've confirmed it, we'll waive it out of committee timely,
Okay, thank you.
without objection, of course.
But it would already satisfy public comment.
Yes. Presumably, public comment is already satisfied, although no speakers have requested to speak on that item. Anything else before us? If not, we are adjourned.